Dawn breaks over the war-torn skies of Europe. High above the clouds, a formation of B-17 flying fortresses drones steadily toward its target. To the men inside, every mission is a gamble with death. But today, the real danger is lurking just out of sight. Below, a squadron of experienced Luftwaffe pilots scans the horizon. Their orders are clear: intercept and destroy the American bombers before they can unleash their deadly cargo. For months, these German aces have hunted B-17s, calling them flying coffins, slow, heavy, and in their eyes, easy prey. As the German fighters climb to intercept, confidence fills their cockpits. They have done this before. They know the drill. The bombers, they believe, are sitting ducks lumbering targets just waiting to be picked off. But today, something is different. As the first Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs dive in, the B-17s hold their formation, seemingly oblivious to the threat. The Germans close in, guns ready, expecting panic and chaos. Instead, they are met with a wall of fire. Suddenly, the sky erupts. Dozens of .50 caliber machine guns blaze from every angle: nose, tail, top, and belly. Tracers streak through the air, filling the sky with deadly lines of light. The Luftwaffe pilots, caught off guard, are forced to break off their attack as bullets rip through their wings and cockpits. What was supposed to be an easy kill has become a nightmare. The B-17s, once seen as helpless targets, have become flying fortresses in every sense of the word. And for the first time, the hunters are the hunted. The stage is set for one of the most dramatic reversals in the air war over Europe. This is the story of how the Luftwaffe's easy kill turned into a deadly trap, and how B-17 gunners unlocked hell in the skies above. By 1943, the skies over Europe had become one of the most dangerous front lines of World War II. The Allies had launched a massive, strategic bombing campaign, determined to cripple Nazi Germany's war machine from above. Factories, railways, oil refineries, and military installations became prime targets, and the responsibility for delivering destruction from the sky fell largely on the shoulders of the United States Army Air Forces and their British counterparts. The American approach to bombing was bold and controversial. Unlike the British Royal Air Force, which preferred to strike at night to avoid heavy losses, the US AAF believed in daylight precision bombing. Their theory was simple but risky. By attacking during the day, they could see their targets more clearly and inflict greater damage on Germany's industrial heartland. But this also meant flying straight into the teeth of German defense flak guns, searchlights, and most deadly of all, the Luftwaffe's fighter squadrons. At the heart of this campaign was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. With its 4 engines, rugged construction, and impressive range, the B-17 quickly became the backbone of the American bomber fleet. Its nickname, Flying Fortress, was no accident. The aircraft bristled with machine guns mounted in turrets and windows all along its fuselage. The idea was that a tight formation of B-17s could defend itself, creating a deadly crossfire that would deter enemy fighters. But the reality was far more brutal. Early missions revealed just how vulnerable even the most heavily armed bombers could be. German fighter pilots, flying agile Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s, developed tactics to exploit the bombers' weaknesses. They attacked from above, from the front, and from the rear, using speed and surprise to their advantage. The Luftwaffe's goal was simple: break up the bomber formations, isolate stragglers, and pick them off one by one. The air battles that followed were fierce and unforgiving. For the crews of the B-17s, every mission was a test of nerves and endurance. They faced not only the constant threat of enemy fighters, but also the deadly curtain of anti-aircraft, known as flak, that filled the sky with shrapnel. The roar of engines, the rattle of machine guns, and the sudden, violent impacts of enemy fire became the soundtrack of their lives. Losses were staggering. In the early stages of the campaign, entire bomber groups could be decimated in a single raid. The odds of surviving a full tour of 25 missions were slim. Yet, despite the danger, the bombing campaign pressed on. The Allies believed that by striking at the heart of Germany's industrial power, they could shorten the war and save lives on the ground. The Luftwaffe, for its part, was determined to stop them. German fighter pilots became some of the most skilled and deadly aces of the war, racking up impressive kill counts as they defended their homeland. But the cost was high on both sides. The skies over Europe became a graveyard for men and machines alike. As the campaign intensified, both sides adapted. The Americans introduced new tactics such as the combat box formation, designed to maximize defensive firepower. They also began to develop long-range escort fighters, like the P-51 Mustang, to protect the bombers all the way to their targets and back. The Germans, meanwhile, experimented with new weapons and attack strategies, always searching for a way to break the bomber streams. Through it all, the B-17 remained a symbol of American resolve. Its crews became legends, their bravery and sacrifice celebrated in newsreels and newspapers back home. But behind the headlines was a grim reality. The air war over Europe was a brutal, grinding conflict, fought mile by mile, mission by mission, high above the fields and cities below. For the men who flew these missions, the experience was unforgettable. They lived with the constant fear of being shot down, of bailing out over enemy territory, or of never making it home at all. Yet they pressed on, driven by duty, camaraderie, and the hope that their efforts would help bring an end to the war. The strategic bombing campaign would ultimately play a crucial role in the Allied victory. It disrupted German industry, strained enemy resources, and forced the Luftwaffe to fight a costly battle of attrition. But it came at a terrible price. Tens of thousands of airmen lost their lives, and countless more were wounded or captured. As we look back on this chapter of history, it's important to remember the scale and intensity of the air war over Europe. It was a battle fought not just with machines and weapons, but with courage, determination, and sacrifice. And at the center of it all stood the B-17 Flying Fortress, a machine that would become both a symbol of hope and a harbinger of destruction in the skies above Nazi Germany. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was more than just an airplane. It was a legend in its own time, a symbol of American industrial might and ingenuity. When it first took to the skies in the late 1930s, the B-17 represented a new era in bomber design. Its creators at Boeing set out to build a heavy bomber that could fly higher, farther, and carry more bombs than anything that had come before. But what truly set the B-17 apart was its reputation for toughness and its formidable defensive armament, earning it the nickname Flying Fortress. The B-17's design was both practical and innovative. With its four powerful Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines, the bomber could reach speeds of up to 287 miles per hour and fly at altitudes above 30,000 feet, well out of reach for many early warfighters and anti-aircraft guns. Its long, slender wings gave it impressive range, allowing it to strike deep into enemy territory and return home, even when heavily damaged. The aircraft's robust construction, featuring a strong, all-metal airframe, meant that B-17s could absorb incredible punishment and still bring their crews back alive. Stories of B-17s limping home with gaping holes in their wings, missing tail sections, or even with engines shot out became the stuff of legend among Allied airmen. But the real secret to the B-17's survival was its firepower. Early versions of the bomber carried 5.30 caliber machine guns, but as the war progressed and the threat from enemy fighters increased, the armament was dramatically upgraded. By the time the B-17G, the most produced and iconic variant, entered service, the aircraft bristled with up to 13.50 caliber Browning machine guns. These were mounted in nearly every direction, twin guns in the nose, chin, top, and ball turrets, single guns in the waist positions, and a pair in the tail. This network of overlapping fields of fire allowed the crew to defend the bomber from almost any angle of attack. The placement of these guns was no accident. German fighter pilots quickly learned to exploit the blind spots of earlier B-17 models, attacking from the front or below where defensive coverage was weakest. In response, Boeing engineers added new turrets and gun positions. The addition of the chin turret, for example, was a direct answer to deadly head-on attacks by Luftwaffe fighters. The ball turret, a cramped and exposed sphere mounted on the belly of the plane, gave the B-17 crucial protection from below. Each gun position was manned by a dedicated crew member, trained to scan the skies and unleash a hail of bullets at any approaching enemy. Inside the B-17, the crew of 10 worked as a tightly coordinated team. The pilot and co-pilot sat side by side in the cockpit, responsible for flying the massive machine through flak and fighter attacks. The navigator and bombardier occupied the nose, guiding the bomber to its target and releasing its payload with deadly precision. The radio operator, flight engineer, and gunners manned their stations along the fuselage, each with a critical role to play in the aircraft's survival. Communication and discipline were essential. A moment's hesitation or a missed call could mean disaster. Life aboard a B-17 was anything but comfortable. The interior was cramped, noisy, and often freezing cold at high altitudes. Crews wore heavy flight suits, oxygen masks, and flak jackets to protect themselves from the elements and enemy fire. The constant vibration of the engines, the deafening roar of the guns, and the ever-present threat of attack created a tense, high-stress environment. Yet, despite these hardships, B-17 crews developed a fierce loyalty to their aircraft and to each other. Many airmen believed that the flying fortress was the only thing standing between them and certain death. The evolution of the B-17's defensive firepower was a direct response to the changing tactics of the Luftwaffe. Early in the war, German fighters would attack from the rear, but as the bombers' tail guns became more effective, they shifted to frontal assaults and coordinated group attacks. The Americans countered by flying in tight formations, known as combat boxes, where overlapping fields of fire created a deadly gauntlet for any fighter daring to approach. The sight of dozens of B-17s flying wingtip to wingtip, bristling with guns, became a terrifying prospect for even the most experienced German pilots. Despite its formidable defenses, the B-17 was not invincible. Many were lost to enemy fighters and flak, and the casualty rates among bomber crews remained high throughout the war. But the Flying Fortress earned a reputation for bringing its crews home against all odds. Tales of B-17s returning to base with massive damage times with only one engine running, or with entire sections of the fuselage blown away become legendary. These stories were not just morale boosters. They were a testament to the aircraft's rugged design and the courage of the men who flew them. By the end of the war, more than 12,700 B-17s had been built, and they had dropped over 640,000 tons of bombs on enemy targets. The Flying Fortress became a symbol of American air power and determination, its silhouette instantly recognizable in the skies over Europe. For the men who flew and fought in them, the B-17 was more than just a machine. It was a fortress in the sky, a lifeline, and a legend that endures to this day. As the Allied bombing campaign intensified, the Luftwaffe found itself facing a new and daunting challenge: waves of heavily armed B-17 flying fortresses crossing into German airspace, determined to strike at the heart of the Reich. For the German fighter pilots, intercepting these bombers became a daily test of skill, courage, and innovation. The Luftwaffe quickly realized that traditional dogfighting tactics were ill-suited for attacking tight formations of bombers bristling with machine guns. Instead, they developed specialized strategies designed to break up the formations and exploit any weakness. At first, Luftwaffe pilots approached the B-17s from behind, believing this to be the safest angle. The tail of the bomber, however, was heavily defended, and many German pilots paid a high price for underestimating the accuracy and volume of American defensive fire. As losses mounted, the Luftwaffe adapted. They began to favor hidden attacks, a tactic that took advantage of the B-17's early vulnerability in the nose. By closing in rapidly from the front, German fighters could fire a burst of cannon and machine gun fire at the cockpit and engines, then dive away before the gunners could react. This approach was dangerous and required nerves of steel, but it proved effective, especially before the addition of the B-17's chin turret. Another favored tactic was the Schrägmusik, or slanting music, which involved mounting upward-firing cannons in night fighters. While this was more commonly used against British bombers, some German pilots experimented with similar ideas during daylight raids. attacking from below where the B-17's defenses were weakest. Others coordinated mass attacks with groups of fighters diving in from multiple directions at once, hoping to overwhelm the bomber's gunners and force the formation to scatter. The Luftwaffe also made use of Zerster or destroyer aircraft, such as the twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf 110 and Junkers Ru 88, which were equipped with heavy cannons and rockets. These aircraft could deliver devastating firepower from a distance, targeting the bombers before closing in for the kill. Rockets, in particular, were designed to break up the tight American formations, creating gaps that single-engine fighters could exploit. Communication and coordination were key to these attacks. German pilots often flew in Rot, pairs, or Schwarm, fours, using radio to coordinate their movements and time their attacks. Experienced aces led the way, teaching new pilots how to approach the bombers, where to aim, and when to break off. The Luftwaffe's goal was always the same: to disrupt the formation, isolate stragglers, and bring down as many bombers as possible before they reached their targets. Despite these tactics, attacking a formation of B-17s was never easy. The bombers' overlapping fields of fire created a deadly gauntlet for any fighter daring to approach. Even the most skilled German pilots faced tremendous risk. Many Luftwaffe veterans described the experience as flying into a wall of lead, with tracers and bullets filling the sky in every direction. The psychological toll was immense, and the odds of survival dropped sharply with each attack run. Still, the Luftwaffe's tactics did achieve results. In the early years of the bombing campaign, American losses were staggering. Some missions saw entire bomber groups decimated, with dozens of aircraft shot down in a single day. The sight of burning bombers falling from the sky became a grim routine for both sides. German propaganda celebrated these victories, portraying the Luftwaffe as the last line of defense against the Allied onslaught. However, the Germans sometimes underestimated the resilience and adaptability of the B-17 crews. As the Americans learned from their losses, they improved their defensive formations, added more guns, and developed better tactics of their own. The introduction of the chin turret on later B-17 models, for example, made hidden attacks far more dangerous for German pilots. The arrival of long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang further tipped the balance, forcing the Luftwaffe to fight not just the bombers but their agile protectors as well. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was stretched thin. Experienced aces were being lost faster than they could be replaced, and fuel shortages limited the number of sorties that could be flown. The relentless pressure of the Allied bombing campaign took its toll, both in the air and on the ground. Yet, even as the odds turned against them, German pilots continued to launch daring attacks, driven by duty, desperation, and the hope of turning the tide. In the end, the battle between the Luftwaffe and the B-17s became a deadly chess match, with each side constantly adapting to the other's moves. The German pilots who hunted the bombers were among the most skilled and determined of the war, but they faced an enemy that was equally resolute. The story of these air battles is one of innovation, bravery, and the relentless struggle for survival in the unforgiving skies over Europe. August 17, 1943. The morning sun barely crests the horizon as hundreds of B-17 flying fortresses rumble down the runways of airfields across England. Their mission is ambitious and dangerous, a double strike deep into the heart of Nazi Germany, targeting the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and the aircraft plants at Regensburg. These factories are vital to the German war effort, and the Allies know that crippling them could change the course of the conflict. But the men climbing into their bombers that morning also know the risks. The route will take them far beyond the range of friendly fighters, straight into the jaws of the Luftwaffe. As the B-17s form up over the English countryside, the mood is tense. Crews check and recheck their guns, ammunition, and oxygen systems. The radio crackles with last-minute instructions. For many, this will be their first mission over Germany. For others, it may be their last. The bombers climb to altitude, engines droning in unison, and set a course for the enemy coast. On the other side of the channel, German radar operators track the massive formation as it approaches. Alarms sound in Luftwaffe airfields across northern France and western Germany. Pilots scramble to their fighters, racing to intercept the bombers before they can reach their targets. Among them is Oberleutnant Hans Keller, a veteran of dozens of interception missions. He and his comrades have been briefed. The Americans are coming in force, and today's attack must be stopped at all costs. As the B-17s cross into occupied Europe, the first flak bursts appear in the sky. Black puffs of smoke mark the path ahead, but the bombers press on, holding tight formation. The gunners scan the horizon, searching for the telltale glint of enemy fighters. Suddenly, the call comes over the intercom. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. Dozens of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs dive out of the sun, guns blazing. For the Luftwaffe pilots, the initial attack goes as planned. They swoop in from the front, firing short, deadly bursts at the lead bombers. Tracers streak past the cockpits, and the sky is filled with the roar of engines and the rattle of machine guns. Several B-17s are hit, trailing smoke and flames as they fall out of formation. Keller lines up on a bomber, squeezes the trigger, and watches as his rounds walk across the nose of the aircraft. For a moment, it seems like another routine interception, but then the trap is sprung. Unbeknownst to the Germans, the Americans have learned from previous missions. The B-17s are flying in a new, tighter combat box formation, designed to maximize their defensive firepower. Each bomber's guns overlap with those of its neighbors, creating a deadly crossfire. The lead bombers have been equipped with the new chin turrets, and the gunners are ready. As the German fighters close in, they are met with a wall of .50 caliber bullets from every direction. Inside one of the B-17s, waist gunner Jack Thompson braces himself as the fighters attack. He can see the enemy planes weaving through the formation, searching for a weak spot. "They came at us hidden, fast and low," he later recalled. "But this time we were ready." The new chin turret opened up, and the whole front of the formation lit up with gunfire. I saw one of the Messerschmitts take a hit and spiral out of control. It was cow smoke, fire, and tracers everywhere. For the Luftwaffe, the attack quickly turns into a nightmare. The overlapping fields of fire make it nearly impossible to approach the bombers without being hit. Keller's wingman is struck by a burst from a top turret and bails out, his parachute blossoming against the blue sky. Another fighter explodes in a ball of flame as a tail gunner finds his mark. The Germans try to regroup and attack from below, but the ball turrets are waiting for them. Every approach is met with a storm of bullets. The radio chatter among the German pilots grows frantic. "Acting! Too much fire! Pull back, pull back!" Someone shouts. Keller pulls his fighter into a steep climb, bullets tearing through his wing. He glances over his shoulder and sees another B-17, riddled with holes but still flying, its gunners defiantly firing at anything that moves. Despite the ferocity of the defense, the bombers are not unscathed. Several are hit and begin to lag behind the formation, becoming easy targets for the circling fighters. But even these stragglers fight back with everything they have. In one crippled B-17, tail gunner Robert Evans keeps firing until his guns jam, refusing to give up even as his plane spirals toward the ground. "We knew we were done for," Evans later wrote in his diary, "but we were going to make them pay for every inch." The battle rages for nearly 2 hours as the bombers press on toward their targets. The Luftwaffe throws everything it has at the formation, but the cost is high. Dozens of German fighters are shot down or damaged, and many more are forced to break off the attack. The B-17s, battered but unbroken, reach Schweinfurt and Regensburg and drop their bombs, inflicting heavy damage on the factories below. For the men who survive, the return journey is a blur of exhaustion and relief. The bombers limp back to England, many trailing smoke and with wounded aboard. Ground crews count the bullet holes and patch the battered planes, marveling at how they made it home. The cost is staggering. 60 B-17s are lost, and hundreds of airmen are killed or captured. But the Luftwaffe has paid dearly as well, losing dozens of experienced pilots and aircraft. In the aftermath, both sides take stock. The Americans realize that even with improved tactics and firepower, the daylight bombing campaign is a deadly gamble. The Germans, meanwhile, are shaken by the ferocity of the B-17's defense. The days of easy kills are over. From now on, every attack on the flying fortresses will be a fight for survival. First-hand accounts from both sides capture the chaos and terror of that day. It was like flying into a furnace, one German pilot later admitted. The sky was filled with fire. We thought we could break them, but they were ready for us. For the American gunners, the memory is just as vivid. We were scared, sure, said Jack Thompson, but we stuck together. That's what saved us. The mission to Schweinfurt and Regensburg would go down in history as one of the most brutal air battles of the war. It marked a turning point in the air war over Europe, a day when the Luftwaffe's confidence was shattered, and the legend of the flying fortress was sealed. From that day forward, every German pilot who took off to intercept a B-17 formation knew that what looked like an easy kill could quickly become a deadly trap. The legacy of that mission endures, a testament to the courage, innovation, and sacrifice of the men who fought in the skies above Europe. The B-17 gunners had unlocked hell, and the Luftwaffe would never underestimate them again. Inside the B-17 flying fortress, war was a personal, up-close experience. For the gunners, every mission meant stepping into a world of noise, cold, and constant danger. The B-17 was designed to be a fortress in the sky, but it was the men behind the guns who made that reputation a reality. Their job was to defend the bomber from enemy fighters, and their courage and skill often meant the difference between life and death for the entire crew. A typical B-17 crew consisted of 10 men, and more than half of them were gunners. Each had a specific position: the top turret gunner, ball turret gunner, tail gunner, 2 waist gunners, and the bombardier and navigator who also manned guns in the nose. The radio operator and flight engineer doubled as gunners when the formation came under attack. Every man was trained to handle his weapon, scan the skies, and react instantly to threats. Training for B-17 gunners was intense and thorough. Recruits learned to identify enemy aircraft in a split second, to lead their targets, and to fire in short, controlled bursts to avoid overheating the barrels. They practiced loading and clearing jams on the Browning .50 caliber machine guns, the backbone of the B-17's defenses. These guns could fire up to 800 rounds per minute, sending streams of deadly lead at attacking fighters. Gunners also drilled in teamwork, learning to coordinate with each other so that every angle of approach was covered. But no amount of training could fully prepare a man for the reality of combat. Once the B-17s crossed into enemy territory, the tension inside the bomber was palpable. The gunners donned heavy flak jackets and steel helmets, their hands already cold from the thin, freezing air at 25,000 feet. Oxygen masks were essential, as the air was too thin to breathe unaided. The roar of the engines was constant, and the vibration of the aircraft made every movement a challenge. When the call came, "Fighters, 9 o'clock," adrenaline surged through the crew. Each gunner snapped to his position, eyes scanning the sky for the telltale glint of sunlight on enemy wings. The top turret gunner, perched just behind the cockpit, had a panoramic view and was often the first to spot incoming fighters. The ball turret gunner, crammed into a tiny, rotating sphere beneath the belly of the plane, had perhaps the most dangerous and isolating job of all. Suspended in a glass bubble, he could see the ground spinning far below and had to defend the bomber from attacks coming from underneath. The waist gunners stood at open windows along the sides of the fuselage, exposed to the slipstream and the biting cold. They had to be constantly alert, as enemy fighters often tried to sneak in from the sides, using the bomber's own structure as cover. The tail gunner, isolated at the very back of the plane, was the last line of defense against fighters attacking from behind. His position was cramped and vulnerable, but it offered a clear shot at any enemy daring enough to follow the bomber's path. Combat was chaos. The sky would suddenly fill with enemy fighters, darting in and out of the formation, their guns blazing. The gunners fired back, aiming ahead of the fast-moving targets, trying to anticipate their next move. Tracers lit up the sky, and the smell of gunpowder mixed with the sharp tongue of cold metal. The noise was deafening, engines roaring, guns rattling, and the constant thud of flak exploding nearby. Communication was vital. The intercom crackled with urgent voices. "Bandits at 3 o'clock. I'm out of ammo. Tail gunner, watch your six." Each man relied on the others to cover his blind spots and to warn of new threats. Sometimes the gunners could see the faces of the enemy pilots as they flashed past, so close that it felt like a personal duel. The physical demands were extreme. Gunners often fought for hours at a time, their hands numb from the cold, their bodies bruised from the recoil of the guns. Oxygen was precious, and a single hit to the supply lines could mean suffocation. Frostbite was a constant threat, and many gunners returned from missions with blackened fingers and toes. Yet, despite the discomfort and danger, they stayed at their posts, determined to protect their crew and their aircraft. The psychological strain was just as intense. Every mission brought the possibility of death or capture. Gunners watched as other bombers in the formation were hit, sometimes exploding in midair or spiraling down in flames. The sight of parachutes drifting toward enemy territory was a grim reminder of their own vulnerability. Yet there was also a fierce pride in their work. Every enemy fighter driven off, every successful defense of the formation was a victory. Stories from surviving gunners paint a vivid picture of their experience. One waist gunner, recalling a mission over Berlin, described how he fired until his barrels glowed red, watching as a German fighter broke apart under his fire. Another, a ball turret gunner, remembered the terror of being trapped in his turret when the hydraulics failed, unable to escape until the plane landed. For many, the camaraderie among the crew was what kept them going. They depended on each other, not just for survival, but for the courage to face another mission. Despite the odds, many B-17s made it home thanks to the skill and bravery of their gunners. Their actions saved countless lives and helped turn the tide of the air war over Europe. The legacy of these men endures, a testament to their resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming danger. Inside the B-17, the gunners were not just defenders, they were warriors, fighting a battle every bit as fierce as those on the ground below. The relentless evolution of the B-17's defenses marked a turning point in the air war over Europe. What began as a desperate struggle for survival soon became a contest of innovation, adaptation, and psychological endurance. As the B-17's firepower increased and American tactics improved, the Luftwaffe found itself facing a new and formidable challenge that would ultimately shift the balance of power in the skies. In the early days of the bombing campaign, German fighter pilots had little reason to fear the B-17. The first models, with only 5 or 7 machine guns, had significant blind spots, especially in the nose and underbelly. Luftwaffe aces quickly learned to exploit these weaknesses, launching head-on and low attacks that often left the bombers defenseless. The results were devastating. In 1943 alone, the 8th Air Force lost more than 1,000 bombers, with some missions suffering casualty rates as high as 20%. But the Americans were quick to learn from these losses. Engineers at Boeing and the USAAF responded by adding more guns, better armor, and new gun positions. The introduction of the B-17G model was a game-changer. With its distinctive chin turret, the B-17G closed the deadly gap in the nose, making frontal attacks far more dangerous for German pilots. The addition of staggered waist gun positions reduced interference between gunners, allowing for more effective coverage along the sides. By the end of the war, a single B-17 could bristle with up to 13.50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. The impact of these improvements was immediate and dramatic. Luftwaffe pilots who once considered the bombers flying coffins for their crews now faced a wall of lead with every attack. Statistical analysis from the period shows a sharp increase in German fighter losses during bomber interceptions. In 1943, for every 100 B-17s lost, the Luftwaffe lost about 50 fighters. By 1944, as B-17 defenses improved and long-range escorts joined the fray, that ratio climbed to nearly 1-to-1. The cost of attacking the bombers was becoming unsustainable for the Germans. Expert analysis from both sides confirmed the shift. American commanders noted that Luftwaffe attacks became less aggressive and more cautious as the war went on. German pilots, once eager to close in for the kill, began to fire from greater distances, reducing their accuracy and effectiveness. Some Luftwaffe veterans later admitted that the sight of a tight B-17 formation, bristling with guns and covered by P-51 Mustangs, was enough to make even the bravest pilots hesitate. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was profound. The once confident German aces now faced a gauntlet of fire every time they attacked. Many described the experience as flying into a wall of death, with tracers and bullets filling the sky in every direction. The stress and fear took a toll, leading to increased fatigue, lower morale, and a growing reluctance to engage the bombers head-on. Some pilots even developed superstitions, believing that certain formations or specific bombers were unlucky and should be avoided at all costs. For the American crews, the improved defenses brought a new sense of hope and determination. While the missions remained dangerous, the odds of survival increased. Gunners took pride in their ability to defend their aircraft and their comrades, and stories of successful defenses spread quickly through the ranks. The knowledge that they could fight back and sometimes even turn the tables on their attackers boosted morale and fostered a spirit of resilience. The broader impact on the air war was equally significant. As B-17 losses decreased and German fighter losses mounted, the Luftwaffe was forced to change its tactics. Massed attacks became less common, replaced by hit-and-run raids and attempts to pick off stragglers. The introduction of long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang further complicated the German response, as they now had to contend with agile, well-armed opponents who could chase them all the way back to their bases. By mid-1944, the cumulative effect of these changes was clear. The Luftwaffe was losing experienced pilots faster than they could be replaced, and fuel shortages limited the number of sorties they could fly. The once dominant German Air Force was now on the defensive, struggling to protect its own skies from the relentless Allied bombing campaign. Statistics from the final year of the war tell the story. In 1944, the 8th Air Force flew more than 200,000 bomber sorties, dropping over 600,000 tons of bombs on German targets. B-17 losses, while still significant, dropped sharply compared to previous years. At the same time, Luftwaffe fighter strength dwindled, and the quality of new pilots declined as training programs were rushed and resources stretched thin. The improved defenses of the B-17 did more than just save lives, they helped turn the tide of the air war over Europe. By making every attack costly for the enemy, the Flying Fortress and its crews forced the Luftwaffe onto the back foot, paving the way for Allied air superiority. The psychological and tactical shift was as important as any technological advance, proving that innovation, teamwork, and determination could overcome even the most daunting challenges. In the end, the legacy of the B-17's defenses is not just one of firepower, but of resilience and adaptation. The men who flew and fought in these bombers faced incredible odds, but through their courage and ingenuity, they helped change the course of history. The Flying Fortress lived up to its name, and in doing so, it helped bring victory within reach for the Allies. The aftermath of the brutal air battles between B-17 Flying Fortresses and the Luftwaffe left a lasting mark on both sides. The skies over Europe had become a proving ground for new tactics, technology, and above all, human courage. As the smoke cleared and the battered bombers limped home, the lessons learned from these encounters would shape the future of aerial warfare and forge legends that endure to this day. For the Allies, the high cost of daylight bombing raids forced a hard reckoning. The Schweinfurt and Regensburg missions, and others like them, had shown that even the most heavily armed bombers could not survive without support. The introduction of long-range escort fighters such as the P-51 Mustang was a direct response to these losses. With fighters now able to accompany the bombers all the way to their targets and back, the balance of power in the air began to shift decisively in favor of the Allies. The Luftwaffe, once the master of the skies, found itself increasingly on the defensive, struggling to counter the combined might of bombers and escorts. The Luftwaffe, for its part, was forced to adapt as well. The days of easy kills were over. German pilots developed new tactics, such as attacking from above or below, and experimented with heavier armament and rockets to break up bomber formations. But as the war dragged on, the Luftwaffe faced mounting losses not just in aircraft, but in experienced pilots. The relentless pressure of the Allied bombing campaign, combined with fuel shortages and the destruction of training facilities, meant that new pilots were often rushed into combat with minimal preparation. The quality of the Luftwaffe's fighter force declined, and the psychological toll of facing the flying fortresses grew heavier with each mission. Amidst the carnage, stories of heroism and sacrifice emerged from both sides. B-17 crews became legends, their exploits celebrated in newspapers, newsreels, and hometown parades. Tales of bombers returning to base with massive holes in their wings, engines shot out, or entire sections of the fuselage missing became symbols of the aircraft's ruggedness and the crew's determination. One famous account tells of a B-17 nicknamed All-American, which returned safely to base after a mid-air collision with a German fighter tore off most of its tail. The crew, working together and refusing to give in to panic, managed to keep the plane aloft and land safely, a testament to both the design of the B-17 and the indomitable spirit of its crew. Individual acts of bravery were common. Gunners who stayed at their posts despite being wounded, pilots who nursed crippled bombers home, and crews who risked their lives to save comrades in distress all became part of the legend. The Medal of Honor and other decorations were awarded to many B-17 crew members for their extraordinary valor under fire. These stories inspired not only their fellow airmen but also the people back home who followed the progress of the air war with a mixture of pride and anxiety. The legacy of the B-17 extended beyond the war itself. The lessons learned from the daylight bombing campaign influenced the development of post-war air strategy and technology. The importance of fighter escorts, the value of tight formation flying, and the need for constant innovation in defensive and offensive tactics all became central tenets of modern air power. The B-17's reputation for toughness and survivability set a standard for future bombers, and its silhouette became an enduring symbol of American resolve. For the Luftwaffe, the experience was sobering. The loss of so many skilled pilots and aircraft weakened Germany's ability to defend its cities and industry. The psychological impact of facing waves of determined, well-defended bombers contributed to a sense of inevitability about the outcome of the air war. Yet, even in defeat, many German pilots displayed remarkable skill and bravery, earning respect from their adversaries and leaving their own mark on the history of aerial combat. As the war ended and peace returned to Europe, the men who had fought in the skies carried their experiences with them for the rest of their lives. Many B-17 veterans spoke of the unbreakable bonds formed with their crewmates, forged in the crucible of combat. Reunions and memorials became a way to honor those who did not return and to keep the memory of their sacrifices alive. Today, the legend of the B-17 Flying Fortress endures. Restored aircraft fly at airshows, museums preserve the stories of the crews, and historians continue to study the lessons of the air war over Europe. The courage, innovation, and resilience displayed by both sides serve as a reminder of the human cost of conflict and the extraordinary feats that ordinary people can achieve in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, the battles between the B-17s and the Luftwaffe were more than just clashes of metal and fire. They were tests of will, ingenuity, and spirit. The lessons learned and the legends born in those deadly skies continue to inspire, reminding us that history is shaped not just by machines, but by the men and women who dare to fly them. The story of the B-17 Flying Fortress is not just one of engineering or firepower, it is a story of transformation, resilience, and the will to survive. In the early days of the air war over Europe, the Luftwaffe's fighter pilots ruled the skies, confident in their ability to bring down the lumbering American bombers. For a time, the B-17s seemed like easy prey, their missions marked by heavy losses and desperate odds. But as the war dragged on, something remarkable happened. The hunted learned to fight back. Through innovation, adaptation, and sheer determination, the crews of the B-17s turned the tables on their adversaries. The addition of more guns, better tactics, and tighter formations transformed the flying fortress from a vulnerable target into a deadly opponent. No longer could German pilots swoop in for an easy kill. Every attack was met with a storm of .50 caliber fire, and every approach became a gamble with death. The hunters had become the hunted. This shift was more than just a tactical victory, it was a turning point in the air war over Europe. The improved defenses of the B-17s, combined with the arrival of long-range escort fighters, forced the Luftwaffe onto the defensive. German pilots, once the masters of the sky, now faced mounting losses and dwindling morale. The psychological impact was profound. The sight of a tight formation of B-17s, bristling with guns and flanked by Mustangs, became a symbol of Allied determination and a warning to any who dared to challenge them. For the men inside the bombers, this transformation was hard-won. Every mission was a test of courage and endurance. They faced the constant threat of flak, fighters, and the unforgiving elements at high altitude. Yet they pressed on, driven by duty, camaraderie, and the hope that their sacrifices would help bring an end to the war. Their resilience and bravery not only saved lives, but also helped secure the skies for the Allied advance on the ground. The legacy of the B-17 and its crews endures to this day. Their story is a testament to the power of adaptation and the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. The day the hunters became the hunted marked a new chapter in the history of aerial warfare, one where innovation, teamwork, and courage could turn the tide of battle. As we remember the men who flew and fought in the flying fortresses, we honor not just their victories but their determination to stand together against the storm. In the deadly skies over Europe, they prove that even in the darkest moments, hope and heroism can prevail. The B-17 gunners unlocked hell for their enemies, but in doing so, they helped bring the world one step closer to peace.